If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what unexplainable or mysterious experience made you believe in the existence of cryptids, supernatural beings, strange creatures, aliens, etc.? Basically, I live on the edge of a forest known as Canic Face, and a specific area of it known as Caverns Wood, which has been documented in the news for alien sightings and pigman sightings, was the original black-eyed child sighting spot. So you could say it's a massive hotbed of paranormal activity. Since moving here 4 years ago, I have been seeing some kind of entity. This thing stalks the boundaries of the wood, usually black and shadowy, with a skeletal head that resembles a deer skull with antlers. It would seem that it has taken a shine to me, as any time I'm passing the woods, it is there stalking and watching. When I walk the dog, my dog will react to it, and sometimes it can be seen just out on the edge of the wood near the fields. Just weird, and I wondered if we have someone who is an expert in sightings on Canic Face who can look into this. It seems weird, but numerous family members have now noticed the same figure stalking them or watching them from the woods, even in brightly lit sections. I was around 11 or 12 at the time this happened, and it occurred in Texas. Alright, so it was during early spring, if I remember correctly. The sun was starting to set early as usual, and I was walking home from my buddy Jeffrey's house. When I was walking, I saw not a single soul in sight, and with only a single working streetlight on my road, I hurried home as fast as possible. Upon passing around 5 homes, I felt a shiver creep down my spine and my hair rise. It felt as if something was watching me, burying into my being with their eyes. Upon the shiver, I turned full circle, only to see a figure gray as molding clay and around 7 or 8 feet in stature. Its eyes were deep black sockets, and its mouth was as dark as a black hole. Its arms were as skinny as twigs, followed by hands more resembling stumps than human fingers. There also seemed to be an item around its neck. I forgot what exactly it was, so I'm going to guess it was like a piece of black tattered cloth. I let out a small yelp and ran as fast as I ever did in my life. In the distance, I swore I heard small thumps following me. By the time I got to my house, I had swung the door open and bolted the 3 locks on the door shut. I remember a thump on the door among the sounds of a dead corpse hitting the ground. However, after that initial thump at the door, I glanced out the window to find nothing there, as if the monster had vanished into the cloaked darkness around it. So 2 nights ago, me, my brother, and my friend were outside late at night. I was trying to do something creepy or scary. I went to the edge of the trailer on all 4s because it creeped my brother out, and I was going to emerge from the pitch black to creep them both out. But here's the twist, my brother saw me go around the corner of the trailer, but I didn't. They both went around the other corner of the trailer to see what looked exactly like me and was wearing exactly what I was. They both saw me on all 4s, but my brother saw me with extra long limbs, and my friend saw me as normal. They saw me start running at them at all 4s, and then I started sprinting at them and then disappeared once I reached the edge of the trailer. But that's not what I did. What I really did was never go around the trailer. But I was on all 4s when they saw me go around the side. I got to the back end of the trailer in pitch black, and I heard my brother say, "He's going around." So I got up and started to sprint to them. At the exact same time, they saw me sprint at them from the other side of the trailer, which wasn't me. They were so confused and shocked by what they said that they didn't say anything until later that night. So what did they see? Our guess, a skinwalker. Stick-like creature. It was dark, a mile or so from the river, with lots of woods. We were driving. No cars are coming or anything. Night, like after 10, and not near a town. Right on the edge of our headlights, I saw something run across the road. Super fast. So fast, I almost thought it was a glare on my glasses. I didn't say anything at first because my husband does not believe in paranormal stuff, Bigfoot, or anything like that. I happened to look over, and he had a weird look on his face. I asked if he had just seen that. He said yes. I said something really tall and thin. He said yes. In this next part, I was afraid to say it because I thought he would think I was crazy, but I said it anyway. I asked if it looked like a very tall stick, like a thin tree or a stick from a tree, with arms and legs. And he said yes. It really bothered both of us. I've never seen anything like it and didn't even know it was a thing until I started to search it. I've seen ghosts and other things, but nothing like this. This thing was so fast that if you blink, it's gone. And when I say tall, like 10 feet, maybe more, we saw it just for a second in our headlights. I saw it take maybe 2 steps before we passed it. Arms swinging. Very, very thin. It looked like a twig with arms and legs. If my husband hadn't seen it too, I would have never believed I had actually seen it. I know people will doubt it happened, but I know we saw something. I went on a road trip with a friend to look for a fish farm that no longer exists. I was camping in a weird-ass campsite that looked like it was running and had campers and tents up, but we saw nobody, and like a fool, I'd forgotten my sleeping bag, so I spent the early spring night just on this side of freezing to death. I got up in the middle of the night to heat up some tea, and there was something staring at me from the nearby field. It was pitch dark, and I couldn't make out much detail, but it was man-sized, stocky, rounded in shape, and so still that after a while I thought I was being paranoid and figured they just had a standing stone or scarecrow or something in that field I hadn't noticed when we were setting up the tent. Surprise, surprise, it wasn't there in the morning. I would have just chalked it up to just the cold and sleep deprivation, but the vibes of that place were just so freaking weird that we just left the money for the pitch under a rock at reception early in the morning and booked it. My friend James is about as spiritual as a brick and runs on pure logic normally, but even he agreed there was something up with that place. I am living in Germany, Thuringia now. I was hiking a trail in the evening around 11 p.m. in the autumn, and I saw something big. It was like 6 feet high, or 2,10 to 2,40 meters. It had wide, glowing eyes with orange bright coloring. In my area, the only thing as big as this is maybe a male buck. It was standing on my legs, and I whistled to get its attention. It turned around, saw me, and looked at me. At exactly this moment, I felt despair, and my legs were trembling with fear. I did run away, and when I turned around, it was still standing there. It didn't chase me. In fact, it bolted away with a speed I've never seen. This thing traveled a distance of 500 to 800 meters in less than 20 seconds because it was running away in the other direction, and the end of the hike was about 900 meters. Since then, I hear strange noises over me when I sleep, and I hear tapping in my window, both at night. Can I somehow fight this being? What could it be? The thing is, it must be real, because I checked the trail the next day and I still saw the high grass in which the creature ran away. It was also slightly burned. I've encountered this being twice since. The second encounter was at a nearby location of the first one. But this time I knew what I dealt with. Something unnaturally made me run away as quickly as I could. What could be so fast and so big? I am living in Germany, and the biggest thing here are male bucks. I used to work at a rock quarry as security, and lots of strange things would happen while I worked. Like people hanging from equipment, heads bobbing in a pond, little girl standing center on top of pond, random noises. I didn't care much since paranormal stuff doesn't bother me, it just got annoying while trying to read or watch stuff, so I called a buddy who gave me a sentence to read, and the next thing I knew there is a blacked out creature with a huge torso, bigger than a dump truck, no legs, 4 or 6 really long arms, 46 to 49 feet long, long neck, no face and red eyes that were staring at me. This thing had me fearing for my life as it just towered behind a gravel pile, staying out of the one light source on site. I had my brother show up to my job since his truck had more lights than my little car. After leaving my job, that thing chased after me till we drove past the witch's tree on Colorado's haunted road. After talking to said buddy, he said he got the words from a friend's witchcraft book, and after he asking her, I had to wear a pure silver pentagram necklace for 2 years. Would anyone happen to know what exactly that creature was? When I was in residency, I lived near the hospital, so I walked back and forth for my shifts. One night I got out very late, around 2 a.m., and was walking home the way I usually did. This was in the middle of a biggish city or urban area, although pretty deserted for being so late on a weeknight in winter, so no people or cars were around. That in itself was a bit unusual, as usually there was some traffic even at that time of night. The air felt too still. I looked up and blocked my path. Some ways ahead was a giant, dark dog. Giant, like a Great Dane sized or bigger, but a different shape unlike a dog I've seen before. It peered at me, and as I started to walk towards it, it snarled. I stopped and slowly backed up, and it stopped and just stood there. I started to walk around it with a much wider berth, and it snarled again. It wouldn't let me proceed in that direction at all. Very creeped out, I started to walk back to the hospital and turned around to find the dog gone. There wasn't anywhere it could have quickly hidden. Shaken, I returned to the hospital and explained the situation to the police officer there, who drove me home. The dog was gone, and I never saw anything like it again. As scared of the dog as I was, I had an uncanny and very clear feeling that it was protecting me from something horrific by not letting me go that direction alone and very late at night. I can't stop thinking of it, despite it being about 5 years ago. Anyone ever heard of anything like this? Recently, my friends and I have been experiencing some strange things, but I'm at my breaking point. I need to know what these things are. Basically, it started when I was 10. I saw this strange creature watching me from the woods. I was going for a walk and saw an all-white creature standing next to a tree. It was about 10 feet tall, had the physique of a bodybuilder, and its only identifiable facial features were two black beady eyes. While looking into its eyes, I felt compelled to walk towards it, and I did. I walked about 6 feet before I snapped out of it. I heard my mom call for me, and I turned to look for her. When I looked back towards the creature, it was gone. During the entire interaction, I heard the sound of wind chimes, which stopped after the creature disappeared. This was in rural Pennsylvania, and that was the only time I saw it there. When I was 13, I moved to Texas. In April, I met Shai and Cajun while playing Minecraft. The three of us became extremely close and are very good friends. We've talked every day for the last few months. About 2 weeks ago, Shai saw the same creature I saw outside his house at the wood line. I didn't think much of it at the time. Shai was understandably creeped out, and I told him and Cajun about my experience for the first time. Over the next few weeks, Shai has seen it around here and there, but nothing insane. Then, about a week ago, I saw the thing in my house. It was standing by my bathroom door, staring at me while I sat at my PC. I called Cajun on Discord and explained what happened, and I was freaked out. It never said anything or moved, it just stared at me. I looked away for a moment, and then it was gone. I stared at it for 30 seconds. A few hours after I saw it, I had my facecam on in a Discord call, where Cajun saw the same creature in my background again, standing by the stairs. We've been doing extensive research but cannot remember the names of these things. Shai has nicknamed them demowalkers, and that's what we've been referring to them as. They make a hissing noise to communicate, we think. I've heard the sound while on a call with Shai. I've also heard wind chimes coming from my room. I've started having nightmares about them. In all of them, Shai, Cajun, and I have been killed. I'm not sure what to do, I'm scared, I'm tired, and I'm paranoid. I need help, and I don't know where else to turn. So for a couple years now, I have seen this creature outside my window. I've only seen it twice, but I've only seen it during the summer. The first time I saw it, I woke up from sleeping and had this urge to look outside my bedroom window. I saw this white shape that was about the size of a bunny. Except it had no head. Even though it had no head, I could feel it looking at me. I looked away because I was scared, and when I looked back, it was gone. It had made no sound at all, even though there were a lot of dead, crunchy leaves outside. My oak tree drops its leaves late. I was really confused, but I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The year after that, last year, I saw it again. I woke up to crunching sounds outside my window. I looked out, expecting to see a cat or another animal to see the white creature again. This time, it was rummaging through the leaves and grass. It looked like it was trying to find something. I realized that it had hands. Human hands. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It noticed me again and walked away towards my back gate. Except that it had disappeared into thin air. It was as if it was slowly losing its shape as it walked away from my window. I have looked up cryptids in my area to see if any match what I have been seeing, but none are anything like it. Has anyone seen anything similar? The most confusing thing to me is, why does it come to my window specifically? What would it want with me? So for a couple years now, I have seen this creature outside my window. I've only seen it twice, but I've only seen it during the summer. The first time I saw it, I woke up from sleeping and had this urge to look outside my bedroom window. I saw this white shape that was about the size of a bunny. Except it had no head. Even though it had no head, I could feel it looking at me. I looked away because I was scared, and when I looked back, it was gone. It had made no sound at all, even though there were a lot of dead, crunchy leaves outside. My oak tree drops its leaves late. I was really confused, but I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The year after that, last year, I saw it again. I woke up to crunching sounds outside my window. I looked out, expecting to see a cat or another animal to see the white creature again. This time, it was rummaging through the leaves and grass. It looked like it was trying to find something. I realized that it had hands. Human hands. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It noticed me again and walked away towards my back gate. Except that it had disappeared into thin air. It was as if it was slowly losing its shape as it walked away from my window. I have looked up cryptids in my area to see if any match what I have been seeing, but none are anything like it. Has anyone seen anything similar? The most confusing thing to me is, why does it come to my window specifically? What would it want with me? I was recently on a hike on Evergreen State College's forest trails, and it was nearing dusk as I was returning. This incident happened probably 15 minutes before complete darkness. I was roughly half a mile away from my destination at the college, and I was walking along one of the paved roads to get to my destination. Anyone who lives near them can tell you that those roads are surrounded by miles of forest on either side. Just as I walked close to one of the crossroads that led to either the college's main campus or one of the industrial parts of the grounds, I had my encounter. I was walking on the right side of the road, just out of the corner of my eye. I saw a flash of what was clearly large, white fangs close to the ground, and I heard loud, angry growling. I could not see the body the fangs belonged to, but considering the general mass of the creature was bigger than a coyote's, I assumed it was a wolf and booked it in the opposite direction towards a stretch of road that led on for miles without any light. As I was running, a car luckily happened to be driving towards me. I looked behind me and could see nothing in the headlights of the car, and I'm sure I creeped this person out by doing this, I crossed the street and ran back towards the college, alongside the car, opposite of where I encountered the creature. Just as I was turning my head back to get another look at the beast, my eyes landed on a completely different creature's shadow. This time it was the shadow of a stag as tall as I am. I'm 6 feet 3 inches, with large antlers. I remember distinctly seeing large antlers. I kept alongside the car on the road and finally made it to my destination unscathed, but even now, a few weeks later, I still cannot wrap my head around what I saw. Was it two separate large creatures I encountered, both hidden in the shadows by the waning light? Or was it one creature, perhaps a single stag that was just low enough to the ground for me to think it was a wolf? Or perhaps even a shapeshifter or skinwalker of sorts? Everybody who lives in this area tells me there are no wolves native to these forests, and while I have seen a good amount of deer here, I have yet to see any bucks or stags, especially ones my height. Anyone have any ideas? Thoughts? Concerns? In 2005, my family and I evacuated to Lafayette, Louisiana, from the New Orleans area. My family, mother, father, and sister, and I were living with a quite hospitable man who opened his house to us after we'd lost everything. He lived on a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, right outside of Rain, a small town outside Lafayette. The house was pretty isolated from the rest of the town. One day we decided to just get out and try to gain some normalcy, so we went to a local fair and stayed out pretty late, watching the local bands and eating all the great food. By the time we had left, the town was dark and empty. Everything was closed. The long dirt road that led to the house was pitch black. The only light was from the headlamps on the car, so only that stretch of road was visible. All of a sudden, a creature ran across the road. This creature almost looked like a monkey, only much taller and skinnier, with no fur, just grayish skin. This creature was quite fast. It ran on 2 feet, slightly hunched over with its arms in sort of a praying mantis position. For lack of a better description, it had very long, sharp-looking claws. Its face was hard to make out because of how fast it was moving, but I remember its eyes were red, and it had a rather small head with pointed ears. I would have completely disregarded this as my eyes playing tricks if it had not been for everyone in the car seeing the exact same thing. After all these years, I still have not found any real animals displaying any of these traits. Anyone have any ideas? The only local Cajun legend that I can associate this with is the legend of the loup-garou. Any thoughts? So I'm a bit hesitant to talk about this, mostly due to what I think it might be, but I really wanted input from other people that sort of knew what they were talking about. The local paranormal group is a joke at best. I was walking home the other night from a grocery store that's about a half mile from my house. I live in the family/graduate housing place on my campus, so there's usually a few brats running around in the parking lot or whatever. But not usually at 10:45 at night. I cross the street, taking a shortcut under a pine, which gives me a full view of the parking lot. I'm super ducking paranoid at night. I've been through/seen shit. I happen to glance up and notice a figure moving on the far end of the parking lot. There's no one else around, and there's only one car, a silver truck, parked in that area. I'd also like to note that this was towards the darker end of the lot. The houses and lights were all along the sidewalk at the end, where I was walking. This thing looks like it's 3 or 4 feet tall, so I thought it was a kid at first and initially paid it no mind, but after a moment, I realized there were 1, no parents in sight, and 2, it was pretty late for a kid to be out. 3, this thing was buck-ass naked if it were a child. It was cold that night, below freezing. And 4, it wasn't moving like a human. Its legs were bent, and its shoulders were sort of hunched. It looked like it was a medium to dark brown color. I couldn't tell if it was covered in hair or just hairy in some places. It had sort of a snout, but mostly a human face. Really grotesque, like someone who was missing facial muscles or had been burned horribly. It sort of reminded me of a slightly less disgusting golem from LOTR. We seemed equally startled to see each other, and it ran around the other side of the silver truck and disappeared, but I could see the fence beyond the truck, so I know it didn't just run off into the next parking lot. I didn't really feel like taking my chances or harassing or starting it, so I cut a wide path around the truck and went home. My guess is that it was either under the truck or in the bed of it. I wasn't risking that shit. I wondered if maybe it was Manigashi or something of the sort. Some of the local tribes, my mother is a member, have similar legends, Narumbi, which are absolutely not to be messed with, so I thought it might be feasible. Does anyone else have any thoughts? It was pretty chilling, and I was really spooked when I got home. Another thing to note is that I've been extremely tired and having nightmares every night since then. This happened about 5 years ago, while I was still in high school. My family lived about 15 kilometers out of town on a dairy farm in rural New Zealand. My sisters and my own had to catch a bus every morning to get to school. On this particular morning, there was a strange light mist over the entire landscape, but it was early in the morning, and the mist seemed to be clearing. Me and my sisters had an uneasy feeling, and the air was uncomfortably still. About 10 minutes into standing on the roadside waiting for the school bus, I noticed a weird figure about 300 meters away between two very tall hedges. It was very tall and thin and was black all over, with no visible features besides arms, legs, and a head. The hedges he was standing between were around 5 meters tall, and the creature was about half as tall, which is insane. I told my sisters, and they both looked, but only one of them could see it. After about 5 minutes of watching the creature, my sister turned away, and at that moment, the thing leapt off the road and into the hedge. Not long after that, the bus came, but the whole experience spooked me and my sister for a long time. Anyone have any ideas about what this could be? My best friend texted me a few hours ago and told me that his parents have been seeing strange things around his house. One of the things that they saw was a very tall man or creature who was walking in the tree line of the woods across the street from his house. He told me that his mom thought she was having a diabetic issue since that can mess with your vision, but his dad came into the room and saw it and said, "What is that?" They said that the man was slumped over and that he was about half as tall as the trees. The woods across the street from his house are really old and very tall, so the fact that this man was half as tall as them is, in my opinion, a bit frightening. The thing that is strange about this sighting is that they said this thing was slumped over. I've heard of other tall man sightings, but I don't think I've heard of one who's slumped over. Has anyone else ever seen something like this? This only happened a few days ago. So me and my sister were bored one day and decided to go ghost hunting, something me and a few family members do a lot. We decided to go to a few different places, armed with a spirit box, around our area. We had a few little responses to questions or just noises that made little to no sense. We decided to go to one of the oldest graveyards in the county, which just so happened to be a few roads over from my mother's house. We get there, set up, turn on the spirit box, and wait. As soon as we turn on the spirit box, it starts going crazy. It starts with just repeating hello over and over again, then, as clear as anything, says my sister's name in my dad's voice. We look at each other in disbelief, then it doses it again. At this point, I tune out. I don't know why, but I just go blank, like my body is frozen, but I can look around. I can faintly hear my sister asking questions and the spirit box replying. As I was looking around, I saw something moving out of the corner of my eye. So, being the dumbass I am, I stupidly looked right at it, and what I saw was a brown, almost skeletal creature. It was like its skin was tied to its bones. It was creeping through the trees surrounding the graveyard. I looked away before I could look at its face. I didn't want to see it. In one motion, I stood up and turned towards the exit. My sister followed me without asking what happened. She just switched off the SB, and we left. I waited until we were away from the graveyard to explain what I had just seen, and we both knew what it was. We got back to our mother's house and explained everything to her. Needless to say, she was freaked out. After a while, we decided to do another spirit box session in the house with our mother. It was quiet for a few minutes until it said my older brother's name, who was not there at the time. Then it switched to his voice, which is very distinctive, and it kept repeating, "Mom, help me, Mom, help me," and it sounded distressed. At this point, we turned off the spirit box. I have had a lot, like, an unnatural amount, of spirit encounters, but never anything like this. I was walking in Capitol Forest with my so. I stopped and went a ways off the path to pee. As I was about to head back, I heard him calling out to me. He sounded alarmed. I thought maybe he had seen a cougar or something, rushed back to the path, and asked him what was up. He said that he'd heard a sound like me calling out to him, but it didn't sound right and he thought I had maybe fallen, we were on a trail with a steep ledge not far off the path, and was being crushed by something or had broken my windpipe. He added that it hadn't come from the direction that I went, so he didn't know which way to go to find me. Needless to say, I hadn't called out to him. He's pretty skeptical and didn't want to talk about details. But I remember as I first emerged from the woods, he said, "Was that you?" Before he started asking if I had called him and was I okay. Judging from that and from the way he seemed to think I had been crushed or fallen and damaged my lungs, it seems to me that the voice sounded abnormal. ETA we knew it wasn't someone in need of help because he said he heard his name being called. The exact thing he heard was name, help. Help. Class trip in high school. We went to a small lake and had a little party the first night. At the time, I was having problems with one of my classmates. I had a huge crush on him, and it wasn't mutual, so I wanted to get away from the crowd a bit. Yes, I did drink some, but just really lightly since I never loved alcohol too much and I just hate the taste of it. You could walk around the whole lake, but that required you to approach it from another guest residence because the path was cut into 3 parts to separate them. Let me explain. The apartment we rented only had 1/3 of this path because that was the one it owned. At the end is a really deep, around 2 to 3 meters, pit, and on the other side of that is a fence. So as I walk, I see one of my classmates, Lily, standing at the end of the path, facing the pit. She wears white and just stands there. As I get really close, like 30 meters away, she suddenly flips around, looks at me with a horrifying look that burned into my mind, and jumps into the pit facing me. I ran there in horror but couldn't see anything. I started screaming out of my mind and started running back to get help. 2 of my classmates saw that, and as I started to tell them what was going on, they got a hold of me and started dragging me back towards the house. As I told them, I wanted to run back there so we could help, but they held me. At this point, I was screaming and crying at the top of my lungs and thinking, why won't they understand we need to help? I saw her jump. It really was a scene. Next thing I know, they're telling me, what are you talking about? Lily's back there drinking, and she wears red. I didn't just see a faint figure or anything ghostly. It looked like a whole person. Flesh and blood. I remember this vaguely, as I was only very young when this happened, but I have had my grandparents tell me the story many times. When I was 5 years old, I used to visit my grandparents on weekends. One of the things we would do was go and visit my great-grandma's gravestone, change the flowers, and make sure it was tidy. Sometimes when my grandparents were doing this, I'd wander off and explore like many young children do. It was a small cemetery, so I was always in sight. I was standing by a gravestone when I heard someone say hello to me. I turn around, and there's an old man with a beard and a wicker hat standing next to a gravestone. He spoke with me and told me he was a farmer. He said he had pigs, sheep, and cows, and he told me he was from Australia. I ran back to my grandparents to tell them who I met and that I wanted to visit his farm. They look up and can't see anyone, so I assume I'm playing around and it's something I've imagined. Fast forward a few weeks, and I'm with my grandparents at the cemetery. We see someone visiting the gravestone where I saw the farmer, so I ask my grandparents if they can ask about the farm. My Nana refused to ask, but my granddad said he would. We walked over to the couple who stood at the gravestone. They were middle-aged, and neither looked like the person I had spoken to. My granddad said something along the lines of, "Hi, sorry to bother you, but my grandson said he spoke to someone visiting this gravestone about a farm." They mentioned we could visit. The couple apparently looked confused and asked me who I spoke to. I described who I spoke to, and they both looked very shocked. Apparently, I described her dad perfectly, and her dad was from Australia and owned a farm that she grew up on. The only problem was that her dad was the one buried underneath that gravestone and had been for the past 11 years. A friend and I were driving up a mountain road to a camping site to join a bunch of our other friends at night. We were sure we were on the right road, and we knew how long the drive should be, but the drive just seemed to be taking forever. So long that we started to question if we'd somehow gotten turned around. We both started feeling uneasy, though at first neither of us voiced this to the other. We kept passing owls in the trees along the side of the road. I mean, dozens and dozens of owls. I've spent a lot of time in the mountains, and I'd think it was lucky to see one, but we saw dozens. All in the trees on the side of the road, staring at us. When my friend had to stop to take a piss, both of us pretty much blurted out how unsettled we were and how this didn't feel right at all, and neither of us wanted him stepping away from the vehicle. He stopped as fast as he could and pretty much pissed right out of the door with the vehicle running and the lights on, then took off again like it was some sort of race. Then we got there. Everyone wondered how we were so late. We did too. We told my father about it later, and he commented on how, supposedly, alien abductees often remember seeing owls. I'd swear to the end of my days that I don't remember a single break in my consciousness on that trip, but I have no idea how it took us so long and can't describe just how wrong the feel of everything was. I've had bears walk by 20 feet in front of me, elk wake me up brushing past my tent in the middle of the night. But felt nothing like that before or since. I had seen plenty of things before this, but this is what solidified it for me. I was 12 to 14, don't quote me on that. It was Christmas time, and the whole family was at my grandparents', super rural Louisiana, house, and I was staying in their fifth wheel camper since there wasn't any room in the house. It was about 2:30 a.m., and I heard their two Great Danes raising hell outside. So I looked out the camper window and saw them chasing a small black object darting back and forth, leaving these dogs in the dust. Out of nowhere, it darted 50 feet under a street lamp my grandfather put up next to his machine shop. Before I tell this next part, I need to preface with this may seem extremely fantastical, but I still get goosebumps retelling this story. In a couple seconds, it went from being about 6 inches tall to being well over 6 feet tall. It was perfectly under the street lamp, and I couldn't make out the real body features. It was like looking at a shadow. It didn't have a face, and I couldn't make it out. It was terrifying. Then it got worse. It turned towards the dogs, who were still barking. It arched its back and screamed at the dogs, but it felt like it was coming from inside my head. The dogs ran, yelping, to their dog house. Then it turned to me. I was about 60 feet away from it, and even though I couldn't make out a face or eyes, I knew it was staring at me. I felt like someone had put ice in my veins. Then it ran and cleared the rest of the yard, about 70 to 80 feet, in less than a few seconds. I sat in the camper with every light on and a knife in my hand the rest of the night. The dogs didn't come out of their house for days. When we would try to get them out, they would snap at us. Now I feel I need to say this, but I'm in no way a fearful person. I've had a knife held to my neck. I've been shot at, jumped, and beaten. I have never felt this level of fear again. I never feared that I was going to die more than I did in that moment. I grew up in those woods and have never seen anything like this before. I'm 27, and I've been afraid to go back into those woods ever since. I definitely don't leave the lit area around the house at night. My family rented a cabin every summer. This year it was a giant 4-bedroom one and was absolutely beautiful. My brother and I got the room to the right on the top of the stairs. Being kids, we explored the house with my cousins. There was a crawl space in the room we got, and the door was covered by a chair. We moved the chair and looked inside, and it was another decent-sized room, filled with really old, dusty boxes of files and a briefcase. No one went in because of the wimps, we just closed the door and replaced the chair. That night, my brother and I pushed the beds together because none of us wanted to sleep near the spidery window and fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, and since I wore glasses, it was pretty blurry, but I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There's a woman sitting in the chair, just looking at us. I didn't feel threatened or scared. I remember just staring back and then turning around and falling asleep again. She was wearing a dress, but everything else was pretty blurry. When we woke up and started getting ready for the day, my brother asked if I had seen anything weird last night, and I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just said there were weird shadows that looked like people. He asked if it looked like a woman. And I said yes. He asked if she was wearing a dress. Yes, again. We just nodded at each other and didn't talk about it again until we got older. The place was creepy, though. Later that day, we found a locked room on the first floor with nailed windows and thick window coverings. I never rented it again, even though it was great value and beautiful. So this experience took place at my grandparents' house with 2 of my cousins, one 11 at the time and the other 8. My grandparents have lived in this house for almost 50 years, and so it was known to all of us in the family that the house was haunted. So this particular event took place one night when the oldest of these 2 cousins, let's call her J, decided to spend the night at my grandparents with the younger cousin, let's call him D anyway. The night started out normal. They stayed in the extra room, which faced the kitchen. And like most old people, my grandparents went to bed early and left my cousins watching TV in the room with the door open so the light from the room would show into the dark area before the kitchen. My cousin Jay told me it was around midnight when Dee heard something coming from the kitchen. So Jay gets up, and Dee follows behind her. They reached the door frame when they saw a little ugly little person with lumpy skin and a tall pointy red hat just walk by with a creepy, raspy laugh. They told me they were frozen for like 5 minutes before they took off to my grandparents' room. To this day, they swear by what they saw. Jay is now 26 and Dee is 22. So, has anyone had any experience with this type of entity? I live in the California Central Valley, and the small city where I reside is surrounded by orchards of all types. Around my neighborhood, I've seen bats, lizards, sparrows, and ducks. I guess this is all background information. Anyway, one night around 10 p.m., I skated over to the park around the corner to smoke a little bowl before I went to bed. As I'm heading back home on my board in the middle of the street, I hear some large gusts of wind, but it was a still, quiet night. I look up in the direction of the sound, and behind the slope of my neighbor's roof, I see two large wings flap and then begin to fold, as if the creature had just landed there. As the wings were folding, I'd guess they were about 5 feet in length, and I noticed that the house light from behind the creature trickled through the wings. They were opaque and leathery, not feathered like hawks. It seemed to have heard me as I was passing, and it became still, wings folded and rising over its circular head. It had no ears, horns, or anything protruding from its head, it was just round. I couldn't see much more as the light was behind the creature, so it was a black silhouette, but the leather on its wings was brown. I pulled out my phone and tried to use the flashlight setting to get a better view of it as I was passing, but the light didn't reach far enough, and the creature slowly started to descend behind the slope of the roof until I no longer saw it. I ran into my home and just laid in bed, thinking about what the hell I had just seen. It was too big to be a bat. I've seen bats around here, and they're all small, and their heads are nothing like what I had seen. It couldn't have been a bird either, as I distinctly remember the wings being leathery with no feathers. Anyone heard of similar sightings? Okay, so I used to live in Vancouver, Washington, on a cul-de-sac in Orchard Dell, Connecticut. It was a T-shaped cul-de-sac with another road going off of the side of the T. So I was heading to school at about 8 a.m. that morning. I only had to walk about a block from my house to where the cul-de-sac meets the main road, St. James Road. This was your typical everyday route that I took. However, that morning was different. When I got close to St. James, I looked up from my feet, and across the road was what I could only describe as a creature. It was made entirely of black spheres. In the shape of a man, it definitely had 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and a head. But again, they are all made up of black spheres about a foot wide, a little bigger than a basketball. All of the spheres had a texture to them that I had never seen before. That is creepy enough, but it was dancing around a pole across the street. The thing is, and that's really hard to convey, that this thing projected nothing but pure malevolence. I felt that this thing was bad. Really, really bad. I would not say it was evil, it was just bad. It's like the difference between saying a man can be evil but a man can also be good. This thing could not have the possibility of being good, there was no way. It was bad through and through. Anyway, when I looked at it, it stopped dancing. Looked at me and just popped out of existence. It did not fade. It did not make any sound. It was just there one moment, and the next moment it was gone. I was very freaked out, but it wasn't like I was hurt or felt bad, I was just freaked out. Anyway, I just went to school like normal, if not a little shaken. Well, that night there were some kids racing cars drunk, and there were 4 or 5 people who killed the driver, and all the passengers all died instantly. When I went out with my father to the corner where it happened, I was shocked because it was the exact same intersection where I saw that thing the previous morning. I cannot help but think I saw something strange that morning. Something I was not supposed to see. Whatever that creature was, it was bad news. I saw an unidentified flying object, thing, or creature in my backyard last month, and I can't find any explanation as to what it could be. I was inside our house finishing up some work, but I could see my boyfriend and our dog in the backyard through the back door window. Suddenly, I hear our dog barking. As I glance up to observe what was unnerving her, I realize that it's something flying alongside the back of our 10-foot fence. Quickly, I open the back door and walk onto our patio. The creature was completely silent and looked like a straight, yellow/gold line that was hovering 5 to 6 feet in the air and moving in a precise, straight formation. And let me tell you, this thing was fast. My dog is a greyhound mix and extremely agile, and even she couldn't keep up with it. It was a little less than a foot long and a centimeter or 2 thick. I couldn't tell if it was glowing or if it was just the combination of the glow from our backyard lights and its golden tone that gave off this illusion. Because it was flying and clearly much faster than my dog, it wasn't acting like it was trying to evade danger. I had the feeling that it was fairly intelligent. It was almost playing with my dog, like it was playing a game of tag. It flew back and forth 4 to 5 times in a straight line at about 20 to 30 miles per hour, I would say. My dog attempted to catch it, running as it moved to the opposite side of the fence, but once she started to catch up, it would start flying in the opposite direction without ever having to turn around. It flew in a smooth, unwavering manner. Like when you point a laser at the wall and move it back and forth to get your cat's attention. Obviously, I wanted to get this on video, or at least a picture, but I wanted to get a closer look because my mind needed an explanation. As I moved closer, it quickly flew over our fence, and I never saw it again. But I could hear the bustling of leaves around the side of our house. After I knew it was gone, I looked at my boyfriend, and his face said it all. I asked him what he saw to confirm that my mind wasn't simply playing tricks. His experience was the same as mine. We both have been looking for this thing every night since we saw it, but to no avail. We still have no idea what this unexplained creature could be. Has anyone else had an experience like mine? Or any explanation as to what it could be? If I'm unable to come up with an explanation, or even a plausible theory, regarding what I saw that night, I think it will bother me the rest of my life. I live in Galloway, New Jersey. I know about the Jersey Devil, Pine Barrens, and that sort of stuff. I'm also not really a believer, but I'm not against the stuff. I'm sure it's possible for monsters and ghosts to exist, but without having much experience, I don't know. Anyway, last night, I was home alone. I'm 16 years old, and my parents work pretty late and don't get home until 3 to 4 a.m. I'm used to it now, no siblings, just a dog and 5 cats, so I get the house to myself. I'm lying on the couch watching TV, and I notice something out of the corner of my eye, another pair of eyes looking at me. At first, I just assumed it was an animal or something. We get possums a lot at night, so I didn't think much about it. 5 minutes go by, and I hear this weird clawing at the door. My living room is fairly large, and the TV is in front of me. Then, a couple feet away, is the dining room table and a sliding glass door that leads to my back porch and yard. The thing was on the porch. I got up to investigate, first by flicking the switch on, and immediately it scrambled off the porch. It seemed to be scared of light, so I turned it off and grabbed a flashlight. It wasn't there, so I continued to assume the role of an animal and went back to the couch. An hour goes by, and I hear this loud shriek coming from the yard. This time, getting scared, I jumped up and ran with the flashlight. I dimmed it down by taking my index finger and middle finger and kind of coiled it along the light, still making it visible but not as bright. I shone it around the yard, and the thing was still there, but this time it was eating something. It looked to be small, like a rabbit or a young deer. Where I live, there's a ton of coyotes, so maybe one has strayed. But again, that shriek was awful and not something I've ever heard come from a coyote's mouth. This thing was human, or close to it, anyway. The skin was black and kind of wrinkled, it had long limbs and seemed to be in a crouch position most of the time, but it was extremely fast. I got scared and shone the light at it directly, and it again screamed and dashed off into the woods. I stayed up until my parents came home. I didn't tell them yet, just in case it was something silly. I went to bed, and for the rest of the night, nothing about it came up. Any idea what this thing is? Any help or advice is greatly appreciated. I'm an animal lover, so I don't want my cats or my dog to be outside one day and then get devoured by God knows what's out there. Twice in my young life, I have encountered strange things that I can only describe as goblins, tiny, pure black, almost human figures with pointy joints and glowing white eyes. Their movements almost remind me of Oriental shadow puppets, rickety and nimble. They are probably only 8 inches tall. Both times I saw these, I was already scared, as if that served as a precursor. The first time I was visiting my cousin's house a few hours away. She was on my dad's side and Native American, but she hadn't held to our tribe's culture, noting this because her house did feel weird, probably due to no cleansing whatsoever, I would guess, and my dad raised me knowing my tribe. I was 7. I slept on the living room couch, as we had other relatives over to fill the normal bedrooms. The living room is connected to 2 separate hallways. I awoke sometime in the night and looked into the hallway's entrance. From the moonlight coming from the living room window, I dimly made out a figure. Small, pointy, and rickety looking, it just stood in the hallway. I eeped, and it turned to reveal glowing white eyes that were far too large to be human. This was the first time I felt my stomach knot up, and I went absolutely still. The creature made a skittering sound as it came closer, so it must have had nails or claws. It looked at me before passing into the hall leading to the kitchen. I let myself take a breath, but in a flash, the creature ran back into the hallway and faced me once more. It cocked its head and walked into the bathroom. Finally, it poked its head out of the bathroom and seemed to giggle before disappearing. Everything in the bathroom was orderly the next day. The second time was on Halloween night, in my junior year of high school. It's typical to get spooked on Halloween, right? I was walking with a friend back from a party, barely seeing anyone else on the streets at 11:45 p.m. and on. We'd forgotten to bring flashlights for the walk back to her house and my car. We turned onto a road with houses dotting it alongside unruly bushes and lots of yellow grass. I felt a sense of dread come over me. A minute later, some rustling happened in the bushes, spooking us but otherwise not being a pain. Another minute, and darkness seeped from a crack in the sidewalk into that creature from 9 years ago. Before, I had been alone. This time, I had a friend beside me, seeing it too. It appeared in profile, giving me a view of a long, rounded nose and jutting jaw before turning to face us. We both screamed, running for 2 blocks and a turn, never looking back, and finally stopping when our legs were going to give out. There was no sight of the creature, and we were on a much less foreboding street now. My friend asked what that was, and I could only answer that I had no idea, but I had seen it once before. We got to my car and our home safely that night, and I haven't seen that thing since. If anyone has an idea of what they could be, I'd love to know. First, let me say that I'm a very skeptical person, but the detail and seriousness with which my stepfather told me this story made me at least believe that he saw something. We decided this could possibly be something you guys could explain. I was 19 in 1990, and at about 2:30 in the morning, I was on the way home from a friend's house in Dublin, Ireland. I was walking through a laneway shortcut I usually take to get home. But on this night, I saw something really strange. At first, I thought I saw 2 men trying to break through the skylight of a house on a house down said laneway. As I looked closer, it looked like the 2 men were playing fighting in some way, with one lightly tapping the other in the face. It was at this point that one spotted me, and both jumped down onto the top of the wall. Before I knew it, they were both on top of a garage about 10 feet away from me and were staring right at me. And without sounding too dramatic, I was sure they weren't just 2 men. Both were staring intently at me. The smaller one behind the other. It's hard to explain what they looked like. After a few seconds of them staring at me with very wide eyes, I genuinely shit myself and then ran. I heard the soft sound of the 2 landing behind me and assumed they were following me. It wasn't until I got to the end of the street that I looked back to see that they had actually run further back to some tall grass and were staring at me through them. I then immediately headed home, white as a ghost with shit in my pants. After getting home and explaining the incident to my family, they weren't sure what to say, but they knew I was very shaken by it. The next day, my dad asked me to bring him to the spot where it happened, and we took our dog. The dog was fine until she reached the grass I saw them at and proceeded to stop and refused to move until we headed back. I have no clue what I actually saw. So, my camp is really strange. The deep part of the boundary is not really where people want to be, and I had some experiences with the paranormal there, but not completely physical things. Here's a story about a strange creature my friend found there. One day, he and his girlfriend were walking in the deep part of the forest. It was the night game, so they were allowed in those parts. So, he's walking around when they notice a bare white creature. It was definitely humanoid, and it looked almost like a golem. He said its fingers were quite long and had long fingernails. Its eyes were bare, cold, and very large. When they noticed it, they began to walk slowly backwards so they wouldn't be attacked. Well, too late. The creature swiftly bolted at them both, and he began to run with his girlfriend, when slice. He noticed his girlfriend's shirt, which was cut in the shoulder area. She wasn't hurt, but she was damn spooked. They immediately ran back to camp, where they went to their different sections. The girl cabins are located differently than the males. He still has his girlfriend's shirt, with permission, of course, which he showed me. You could clearly see a huge slash in the shoulder of the t-shirt, and it didn't look like something you could cut with a knife or scissors. What's even creepier is that, when it was allowed, Circean cabins could sleep in treehouses there. When we got there, we all had an eerily strong feeling that we were being watched. This just proves that there are some things that cannot be explained. A few weeks ago, I was sleeping in my room when I suddenly woke up with my heart pounding. When I opened my eyes, there was this weird, short creature standing a few feet away from me, staring at my bed and me in it. For a minute, I was sure I was still sleeping, because there was no way it could possibly be in my locked room. There's really no good way to describe it. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was black or brown all over. Its eyes were too big, relative to our human eyes, and it could see in the dark, clearly, since it was looking at me. I should note at this point that my room never gets completely dark. I live right by a well-lit street, and it's never entirely black in my room. As soon as I came to the realization that I was, in fact, awake, the thing turned around, bolted across the room, jumped on my counter, and vanished mid-step. Needless to say, it scared the crap out of me. I spent the rest of the night with my light on, barely sleeping because I was terrified of whatever had been in my room. Now, I'd pretty much managed to convince myself that I was going crazy and hadn't actually seen anything in my room. Then, last weekend, I saw the same thing again in my room. This time, I woke up, and it was sitting on my counter, right by where it disappeared last time, and was sort of kicking its legs while staring at my room. It looked kind of like a kid sitting in a chair, honestly. I sat there staring at it in the dark for probably a full minute before I reached for my lamp. While struggling to find the lamp switch, I turned my head for barely a split second, and when the light turned on and I looked back, the thing was gone. Now, other weird stuff has been happening. My radio will turn on when I am nowhere near it, and things I have left in a certain place will disappear for days, then turn up in some other place. I don't know what is going on, and frankly, I feel like I'm going crazy. The following story happened yesterday while I was sleeping over at a friend's place, where we'd share one bed. I suddenly awoke in the middle of the night, and there was a face with huge black eyes right in front of mine. It definitely didn't look human, and it didn't show any expression, like an alma mater. It also seemed to look at me, but at the same time, it passed me. It's kind of hard to describe. Because it was extremely dark, I tried to rationalize that what I was seeing must be my friend's cat. I remembered that she once told me that her cat would often stare very closely at her face when she's hungry and wants food. I thought the huge eyes were simply the cat's face being too close to mine. Because I wanted it to move away from my face, I started to stroke it, just like I would do to a cat, and said, "Fiora?" Which is the name of my friend's cat. I could feel my hand touching it, but instead of touching it, it felt like I was touching a person's skin. That's when I started to realize something wasn't right. My friend, who tends to wake up from the slightest bit of noise and who thankfully happened to be awake at that same moment, replied, "Fiora isn't here." The thing's face moved away from mine, and I realized that the eyes remained big. I sat up abruptly and became scared as I noticed that it wasn't my friend's cat. I then saw it move behind my friend's head and on top of her pillow. I told her to look at her pillow, still hoping that my mind is playing tricks on me and that it's just the cat. My friend sat up, stared at her pillow. I can still see that thing sitting there, but she didn't see anything. I started to panic and asked her to quickly switch on the light, but that's when the thing disappeared. I insisted that we look around the room. The doors and windows were closed, so nothing could have entered or left the room, but I firmly wanted to hold on to the belief that it must have been the cat. We obviously found nothing, and my friend began to worry, as I was really panicking at that point. I tried to process what happened and was so confused by the fact that I was stroking something moments ago. Sleep paralysis usually means being unable to move and feeling the sensation of being touched or having some weight on top of you, but this time it was the opposite. I could move around freely and didn't feel any pressure on top of me, but I could touch the thing, and it felt like it was physically there. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I was around 8 years old, and my primary school, British elementary school, was on lockdown. I think it happens in most schools, to be honest, but my school had ghost rumors. I didn't believe them, as I was always skeptical, even back then. So, it was around 7 or 8 in the evening, and the kids were congregated on the field. I had the urge to use the toilet and headed back across the playground into the school building. When I was using the bathroom, I heard strange noises coming from all around the school. Doors slamming, things moving about. I quickly finished up and darted out of the bathroom. The noise stopped. I had almost reached the exit. And then I turned and looked behind me. It is one of the biggest regrets of my life. Something was crouched down by the side of the hallway. I say something because I know it wasn't human. I could see the bones through the skin, which was the color of dead leaves. But the eyes were the worst part. They were pure, pale yellow, with no pupils. I ran out of there as quickly as possible. I told my friends, but they didn't believe me. The final part of this story wasn't scary as much as it was confusing. Several weeks later, we were having a physical education lesson on the playground, and it was a lovely sunny day. I noticed a shadow slinking across the playground. I looked up, there was nothing in the sky. Nothing at all. I looked, and the shadow continued until it left the playground. I have kept an open mind to the paranormal ever since then. The Mothman mystery of Point Pleasant. The first recorded Mothman sighting occurred on the cool evening of November 12, 1966. 5 men were preparing a grave outside of Clendenin, West Virginia, when a winged, humanoid figure descended from a nearby tree and flew down between the group of men before quickly ascending above the tree line and flying away. 3 days later, the most well-known encounter occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 2 young married couples were on a night drive near the West Virginia Ordnance Works, an area known by locals as the TNT area. They passed the old power plant when they saw 2 glowing red eyes in the distance. The car slowed to a stop as they tried to figure out what it was they were looking at. The creature in the distance appeared to be 7 to 10 feet tall with a human-like body and wings. The creature stood there, staring at them, before taking off. The group panicked and sped away, but the creature pursued them. They drove over 100 miles per hour, trying to escape from whatever was following them, but the creature continued to follow them until they made it into town. After taking time to compose themselves, the two couples decided to go back and investigate the TNT area. They reached the armory that was next to the old power plant, and the creature reappeared. It let itself be known by letting out a loud shriek and began trying to attack their car. They tried to drive away, but the creature landed in front of the car, blocking their escape. When the headlights of the car shined upon the creature, it appeared to be frightened by the light, and it took off and disappeared into the night. The couple made it safely into town a second time and went right to the police to report the mysterious creature they encountered. Deputy Halstead followed them back to where the first encounter occurred, but there was no sign of the creature. When the deputy went to the radio for an update on the situation, a loud shrieking noise came over the radio. It was the same noise the two couples heard the creature make earlier in the night. The deputy quickly shut off the radio and left the scene to file his report. The sheriff called a press conference the next day and told the press about what happened the previous night. The press dubbed the creature the Mothman after a villain from the Batman TV show. On November 27, 1967, Connie Carpenter left a church service and witnessed the Mothman on her way home. She was so traumatized by the incident that she could not stop speaking of the creature's devilish red eyes. Soon after, she became the first of many Mothman witnesses to be harassed by strange olive-skinned men dressed in black suits. Newspaper reporter Mary Heyer interviewed many of the eyewitnesses and wrote about the Mothman phenomenon before the men in black tried to silence her and end her investigation. Heyer was continuously harassed by these mysterious men until her death. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge that connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during rush hour traffic, resulting in the deaths of 46 people. Official reports say the tragedy was the result of a combination of the bridge's age, poor maintenance, and the increased traffic load. However, many reported seeing Mothman before or during the collapse. After the Silver Bridge collapsed, sightings of the Mothman came to an end. Others believe that Mothman and the unfortunate events that occur in the Point Pleasant area are the result of a curse placed on the land by the Shawnee, Chief Cornstalk. After the Battle of Point Pleasant, the war chief made peace with the American settlers. However, the peace only lasted a year before a group of American soldiers assassinated him. Before his passing, Cornstalk cursed the surrounding area with his dying breath. Other theories include that Mothman may have been a mistaken crane, an owl, or even a mutated crane caused by the chemicals left behind at the old chemical plant in the TNT area. Some people think that the Mothman may have even been an alien because there were numerous UFO sightings reported during the 13-month-long Mothman phenomenon. It is even said that it may have been an undiscovered animal or simply the result of mass hysteria that was fueled by the media reporting sensationalized eyewitness testimonies. Despite the lack of sightings of Mothman in Point Pleasant, there have been recent sightings of Mothman outside a mine in Freiburg, Frankreich, Germany, before the mine collapsed a few days later. A Mothman sighting also occurred in Chernobyl before the nuclear meltdown, and Mothman was even said to have been spotted during 9/11 flying through the smoke after the first tower collapsed. These events fit the theory that Mothman is a precognitive being that tries to warn others of impending tragedy. Random sightings aside, only one city can compare to the Point Pleasant phenomenon. Since 2016, there have been over 30 reported sightings of a winged humanoid creature in the Chicago area. This monster has been dubbed the Chicago Mothman. These sightings are happening at an almost weekly rate. Those who are familiar with the Point Pleasant Mothman are worried that these sightings may also be an omen of disaster to come. When I was 7, I believe I was abducted. I was playing hide and seek with maybe 10 other kids from my church on an army base in Kornwestheim, Germany. In the large common grounds, like a park, between housing units, I hid on the far side of the field, laying down on the opposite bench of a cement picnic table. I could see in between the table and the other bench the other kids running, and no one seemed to see me. It was an awesome hiding place, and I was proud of it. The next thing I know, I look up and see a ring of 6 lights in the sky overhead. And when I realized that it was weird, not normal, all the points shot together like they shot straight up into the sky. I got up and ran back across the field, realizing that all the other kids were gone. I asked my brother if we were going to play hide and seek, and he just gave me this look like I was weird and didn't say anything. It wasn't until almost 30 years later that I realized what all that meant. I'd told others all of the above, but it didn't seem important how much later in the evening it was in that instance. 1 second later, it was sunset. The next day, there were stars in the sky. They had already played, which explained my brother's response. That was the first I remember. Many, many more. This took place in July 2021. I went to Colombia for about a month and a half. During that stay, I traveled throughout the country 3 times. During one of those trips, I went to my mom's uncle. He lives in Pasuncha. It's filled with mountains throughout this area, and my uncles live halfway up the mountain. So at 10:45 or so, one of my cousins had the idea to go to the cemetery with my other 3 cousins. The 5 of us left the house and had to walk up to the top of the mountain for about 10 to 15 minutes to reach the cemetery. Note, 2 of my cousins were like 11 or 12, one was 20, and the other was 17 or so, and here I am in the middle, 13 years old. I was a mature 13-year-old, I'm currently 14, because I had always been in a grade above the one I was supposed to be in. Therefore, I grew up with friends 1 or 2 years older than me. We entered the cemetery as a whole group. The cemetery has an N layout, the right side had the entrance, and the left side had an exit, but a little further back. At the end of the cemetery, there was a little fall at the back in order to do the loop and exit. We walked through the cemetery, and my cousins of 11 and 12 were petrified, clinging to my cousin of 17, they were so scared they didn't want to go any further. So we walked back to the entrance. The oldest cousin said that we wouldn't see anything paranormal when there were lots of people. We decided to split into 2 groups. Group 1 consisted of my cousin, 20, and me, the other group was the rest. Group 1 was going to enter first, and then Group 2 would follow suit shortly after. My cousins of 11 and 12 were still terrified, so they didn't want to go in smaller groups. Group 1 decided to go in alone and actually record the walk around the cemetery to catch anything paranormal. We were walking around and did the little jump at the end of the cemetery to do the loop. There was a little church at the exit. The church didn't have windows, it just had a metal fence and was completely locked. There was absolutely no one, and anyway, anybody would be in there because I had scanned the inside of the church from outside the metal fence, and it was completely locked. We didn't see or hear anything, so we decided to go back to the exit, where my other cousins were waiting for us. We got back to the house around 11:45, and I decided to review the footage and saw a head of a spirit or a creature popping out from the church. We had just been there, and no one was inside. You could see the outline of the head, but it had no facial details. When I was about 8, I would always wake up at 6 a.m. and walk to my parents' bedroom, wake them up, and ask if I could go downstairs. Their bedroom was down the hall and to the left of mine behind right next to the stairs down. So I asked, they said yes, and I tiptoed towards the stairwell. It was summer, and the sun had already started to rise, so I could see well enough. I went down a couple steps and stopped, I can't remember why. Then I heard something like a man and a wolf howling at the same time, really loud. I have dogs, but they never ever howl, and we were both upstairs in my brother's room. I didn't move, and something black and shadowy with small, white eyes just appeared, hanging around the corner and watching me. I ran backwards into my room and jumped onto my bed because I thought, the monsters can't get me in bed. I have tons more stories like this, my house seems to have a lot of entities and spirits. I didn't move at all until my parents woke up. I'm a 27-year-old woman. My boyfriend and I were able to purchase 15 acres of land this year, right next to a national forest in the Carolinas. It has always been my dream to live in a forest on a mountain, and we were so excited when we found the land. It was priced so low and is a 5-minute drive from the lake, so we of course grabbed it up as fast as we could get the loan approved. We put a small mobile home in the middle of the property where we currently live while we have our home built about 3 acres away. There isn't much built now, just the cement slab, a few metal beams, and a roof. It's going to be a barn dominium. Now onto the story. We moved onto the land in late May, and everything seemed great. A few weeks ago, I started taking my 2 dogs out for walks around the forest to check where the property lines were and also just to enjoy the scenery, which is truly beautiful. We got to where the property line ended and the national forest began, and I wanted to go further in as I knew there was a trail you could take nearby that leads to the top of the mountain and a rest area where I planned to call my boyfriend and have him come get me and the dogs. The actual hike itself might take about 1.5 hours, and there is a road the rangers take to get to the top that he could drive up. We were about halfway to the trail, or so I thought, when my German Shepherd Crush took off into the woods, barking. He's usually very well trained and comes when called, but he was hellbent on chasing something. Luckily, my other dog isn't as excitable, and she stayed by me. We went deeper into the forest, looking for my dog, when I heard what I thought was a wild boar. If you have never heard of a boar, imagine what you assume a demon crawling out of hell sounds like, and that's pretty much it. I got nervous as I knew a boar could easily gut my dog with their tusk and started yelling out for Crush to come. I could hear him barking angrily, and we made our way to where the sounds were coming from. I found him looking up, barking, and snarling near a large tree. I tried to pull him away, but he wouldn't budge. I had to literally pick up this 80-pound dog and shuffle carry him about 100 feet away from where I set him down. My other dog stayed by the tree, whining, her tail in between her legs. I called for her to come to me, and she did a 180 and took off in the other direction. I looked up in the tree but couldn't really see much, so I just chalked it up to one big-ass raccoon. It took about 2 hours, but I was finally back on my land with the dogs. I told my boyfriend about it when we got home, and he recommended not taking them out too far without leashes so as to avoid this again. When I asked him what he thought it was, he agreed that it was either an opossum or a raccoon, but I told him it didn't explain the boar sound. He just said, "It's the woods, there's a lot of animals," and left it at that. A few days later, I was working from home when my dogs started going nuts. Crush started snarling and jumping up at the window. I yelled for them to stop barking, and since I had to make a call, I let the dogs out with the intention of bringing them back in afterwards. It took all of 10 minutes. When I opened the door, my little dog was sitting on the porch and bolted inside. Crush was gone. I stepped out and started calling for him, scanning the woods for a big, furry black butt. I couldn't see or hear him, so I started into the woods, calling for him. I made my way to where the house was being built, and he was standing by the right-hand side of it. I called for him, but he stood there frozen, ignoring me, so I walked over to him when I saw what he was staring at. It was very large, and on all fours. I don't know what it was. At first, my initial thought was a manged, hairless bear because of its size, but there aren't bears in that forest. I double-checked before we moved in because I was worried about the dogs getting into it with one. It was also lean, so I know it wasn't a bear, as it was too thin to be healthy enough to walk. There was fur or hair, but only on the back, and it was either dark brown or black. I couldn't see a face, but I could tell it did not have an animal snout. I grabbed Crush's collar and tried to tug him towards the construction, trying not to make any sudden movements. I felt the thing watching me as I led Crush into the middle of the concrete. I didn't take my eyes off it. It was about 10 yards away when I heard the boar noise again. It was coming from it. Crush started barking and jumping towards it, with me attached to him via collar. I just said, "Duck that," jerked Crush back towards me and started running back towards the mobile home. I slammed the door, locking it behind me, and grabbed my gun. I called my boyfriend a few times before he answered, and I started yelling at him to come home. There is something on the property. He was home in 10 minutes and took his truck over to the construction site. When he got back, he said he didn't see anything. It's been a couple weeks since then, and this past weekend I saw it again. My boyfriend had to work late, so I was home with the dogs watching TV when my little one scratched at the door to be let out to potty. Crush followed her out, and I left them to do their business. When I opened the door, the little one was shaking, and I couldn't get in fast enough. She hid under the dining table and refused to come out. I called out for Crush and couldn't see him, as he's a black dog in the woods at night. I grabbed the flashlight and walked the perimeter of the house looking for him. I saw a big, furry black butt at the back of the house where the tree line began and called for him. He didn't move. I started towards him when I heard a bark from behind me. I felt my heart and stomach drop. I wanted to cry because I knew what I was looking at, and it wasn't my dog, he was behind me. I felt this overwhelming feeling of fear, dread, and anger and did something insane and stupid. I yelled at it and threw sticks. I told it to get away from us, get off my land, and that I wanted to duck and kill it. I seriously thought I was losing my mind because, before I knew it, I was running towards it. I was about 5 feet away when that thing leapt up and into the woods. Its back legs were so long that I thought it was going to kick me. It smelled like earth and rot. I got a better look at the back of its body. It was borderline human looking, long limbs, short torso. Luckily, my moment of insanity was over, and my dumb ass didn't chase it into the woods. I was mildly pleased with myself that I got it to run away. I started heading back towards Crush and the house when I heard the boar noises again, but they weren't just behind me but all around the woods. I told my boyfriend that he thought I was seeing things. I called my dad, who told me to burn sage on the property and have a shaman come and bless the land, as he thinks it's a skinwalker. He's Blackfoot. I don't know what to do. I bought some cables to hook the dogs to when they go outside, so they can't go too far. I carry my gun with me anytime I have to be outside. I love this property. I love the forest and the mountains. I hate that I'm afraid to walk outside. Has anyone seen something like this before? Does anyone have an idea what this is and how to keep it away from us? My boyfriend doesn't go into the woods much, so I doubt if he will ever see it, so I just sound like a crazy woo-woo lady to him. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was living in Houston with my parents, studying for the bar exam. I would get up every morning around 4 a.m. to go run about 5 miles before starting my long days of studying. By the time night rolled around, I was exhausted and had no trouble falling or staying asleep. My bedroom was on the first floor, which was just a single room next to the garage. The second floor is where the kitchen, dining room, and living room were, and the third floor is where the guest bedroom and my parents' room were located. My parents rarely came to my room because they knew I was either studying or sleeping. This particular night, all was normal. I finished studying, took a shower, and fell asleep to the sound of the Golden Girls on TV. I always set the timer on my TV so I could fall asleep whenever I wanted and not have to worry. Later that night, after dozing off, I was woken up by the sound of someone breathing heavily. It sounded like someone was struggling to breathe. It was as if they had smoke in their lungs and couldn't breathe. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I didn't open my eyes because I didn't want whatever it was to know I was awake, and I was freaked out and didn't want to see what was there. I knew it wasn't either of my parents immediately. I could feel the heat from the breath in my mouth. I slowly and carefully opened my eyes to the slightest amount, and what I saw will haunt me forever. I was wide awake by this time. I could see this tall creature standing over me from my left. It was darker than the darkness of my room, and it was breathing into my mouth. When I got a good look at it, I was even more terrified. It wasn't your normal everyday figure. Although a black figure in your room at night isn't normal, it looked like it had tree branches growing out of it. It had branches coming out of its head and its arms. I can only explain it as looking like Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, but I hadn't seen that movie at the time, if the movie was even out yet. It wasn't until over 4 years later that I saw the movie and immediately thought of my experience. But Groot looks harmless. He's kind-looking, whatever was in my room wasn't kind-looking, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I knew I couldn't just lay there and let it do whatever it wanted to do, so I tried to say a prayer. I closed my eyes and screamed out the Lord's Prayer, and immediately it was gone. I slept with the lights on all night for weeks. To this day, I get freaked out when I wake up in the middle of the night, which is now very often. I often wonder about my experience. I can't decide if I think it was a demon of some sort or an alien. I don't usually tell people this story because they don't believe me. But I will go to my grave, swearing to its truth. My husband and I live in the woods. One night, we were having a bonfire and drinking some beers. We were buzzed but not drunk. We were looking at the stars when a massive triangular object with a light at all 3 points moved over us and just parked there. It blacked out the stars so you could see its shape clearly. It was several hundred feet up. We gradually started getting more and more freaked out. What the duck is that? What the duck is that? And no further memory. We woke up in bed the next morning, both naked, with our clothes scattered everywhere. Neither of us slept naked, and we were not buzzed enough to have engaged in any hanky-panky without remembering it. I woke up thinking that it was odd that we were naked with clothes strewn about, and I went about my morning, not remembering the weird experience until about 20 minutes after I woke up. The memory of it came back super gradually. A couple hours later, my husband woke up, going about his morning. I waited for an hour or so before asking him whether he remembered what we saw. He had no memory of it until I mentioned it. Our stories and memories matched 100%. I am a skeptic of just about everything, but it felt like whatever it was, we saw it, tried to wipe our memories, and then put us to bed, thinking or assuming that humans just rip off their clothes and scatter them before they nest. I have never seen anything like that before or since. I'm an atheist, don't believe in ghosts, gods, or the supernatural, and have always found UFO stories to be ridiculous. But I sure as duck don't have an explanation for it. So a friend of mine had this long-standing ghost story of the Bunnyman at her dad's house. A maybe 8-foot tall shadow figure with bunny ears, or horns, that she saw often in the woods by her dad's house as a child and spoke enough about that her dad and sister teased her about it into adulthood. Her parents were separated, so she lived with her mom after the age of 10 and wasn't at her dad's house often enough for this ghost story to really persist. There were a few incidents at sleepovers, but nothing big. When we were newly 20 years old, we both moved back in with our parents to save some money and pay some bills. She and her mom didn't get along, so her dad gladly invited her to live with him in his house by the woods. She gladly accepted. Of course, her decision to move in brought up the Bunnyman, which we had a laugh about and moved on. I helped her move her stuff because I owned a big car, and why not? Immediately, sketchy things started to happen while we were moving stuff. We would put things in places, and 10 minutes later they would be somewhere else. At some point, she put her purse inside while we were moving furniture, and we lost it. We found it. In my car? But whatever, explainable. But the more it happened, the more we began to kind of freak out. As we moved the last load of the night out of my car, it was dark. The outside lights, motion detected, flickered on and off while we were inside. We went back to my car, unsettled and ready to go back home and be done packing for the day. We get in, and we turn on the lights. On my windscreen, as plain as day, is a huge elongated handprint, as though someone was on top of my car when they pressed it. I can't stress to you how alone we were at the house. It's literally in the woods, far from anything. Her dad wasn't even home, he's a trucker and was gone for a few weeks while we moved her in. We hadn't put that handprint there. Both of us froze, unable to speak. After a moment, I reached up and touched it. It came off. It was inside the windscreen. I wiped it away and started to drive off, pretty spooked. But my friend started to straight up cry. She's a pretty stoic person. I think I have seen her cry maybe twice, and this is one of the times. She only lived there for about 4 months, in between houses, but it was a weird few months. If we started talking about the Bunnyman for too long, something would happen. Lights would go off or turn on. Things would fall off the shelves. We would hear tapping on windows. If we were having a fire in the yard, the fire would spark and pop. We never felt settled there. I'm amazed she slept there because the few nights I stayed in the guest bedroom, it was so hard to sleep. Just an overarching feeling of dread. Very quiet part of the woods too. There are not a lot of bird sounds or wildlife. Lots of weird shit happening in general, stuff going missing, stuff falling for no reason. At some point, my boyfriend's back window was broken, with no possible suspects. Our other friend swore on her life she saw a shadow man in the woods one night, and from then on out she needed to be walked to her car from the house. Anyway, no real big specific incidents, but enough accumulating things that we knew it was haunted. My old, broken down car is there currently because I have no place to really store it. So in 2 weeks, I get to go visit while I get my car towed. Maybe I'll have another Bunnyman experience. I lived in an apartment that my 2 roommates swore was haunted. The landlady lived in the unit below us and had at one time lived in our apartment, and she confirmed that both she and everybody who'd ever occupied our apartment had had some paranormal experience at some point or another. I thought that was bullshit. One day I come home, and my roommate Gwen comes out of her room with tears in her eyes and a quiver in her voice. She asks me if I've been in her bedroom. I tell her, truthfully, that I hadn't, and I ask her what's wrong. She explains. When I was leaving for work today, I was running late and grabbed my purse in a hurry and knocked a bunch of photos off of my desk. I didn't have time to clean up, so I just said, "Duck it, I can do it when I get home," and left for work. But when I got home, all the photos were back on my desk. And I asked our other roommate, Jimmy, and he said it wasn't him. I asked her why that upset her so much, and she said it was because one of the photos was of her maternal grandmother, who had passed away a week earlier. Normally, that picture was towards the back of her desk, but when she got home, she found it front and center. I figured she had actually cleaned the pictures up in a rush and just forgot she did it, but she was very spooked. Then, about a week later, I was at home, sitting in our living room, looking over some paperwork for my job. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my roommate Jimmy walk out of his room, through the living room, and down the hallway that leads to the bathroom, kitchen, and Gwen's bedroom. After a while, I started to feel uneasy for some reason. I looked up and realized that, though Jimmy had gone down the hallway some minutes earlier, there was no noise. No lights were on. Everything was quiet. So I get up and walk to the end of the hall and just stand there for a second, looking down the black hallway into the dark kitchen. I call his name and get no answer. So I step into the bathroom, turn on the light, and there's nobody there. I walk down the hallway further and call his name once more. Nothing. Finally, make it to the kitchen, turn the light on, and sure enough, there's nobody there either. Finally, I texted both roommates to see if they were home. About 15 minutes later, Gwen texts me to tell me she's home in the burbs, and about 2 hours later, Jimmy texts me that he just finished up a double at his restaurant. I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt that I saw a person walk through my apartment. But I was alone. This happened a couple of years ago in Manchester, UK. I lived in the north of the city in a town called Bury and worked early hour and night shifts at the airport. I'll put the real place names here for anyone who would like to search the areas in question. Anyway, one early morning in the winter, around 2 a.m., I set off to work. Around this time there were intermittent overnight roadworks on the motorway, which would send you off at a junction without warning, diverting you back onto the motorway further down, and this night was one of those, taking me off at Worsley and sending down through Worsley, skirting near Eccles towards Manchester's large shopping mall, the Trafford Centre. I knew the area, having lived there a few years previously, But this time of night seemed unusually quiet and deserted on the roads. Normally, I'd see the odd person drunkenly staggering down the street or late-night taxis scurrying around, but tonight, nobody was on the streets at all. I drove down Barton Road, which, to my left, is followed by a dark canal that was mist-covered, and slowed my car up to the red light at the intersection just before you cross an old Victorian-era swing bridge, Barton Swing Bridge, which crosses the River Mersey below. As I slowed to the lights, I suddenly became overtaken with an intense feeling of dread and panic. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. I had this feeling like a smackhead or someone was going to jump out of a nearby bush and jump my car. Then, as cliche as it sounds, my car radio suddenly cut out, and the only noise was my idling car engine. The lights turned green, and I suddenly didn't want to go through them over the darkened swing bridge that loomed ahead of me, almost like it dared me to cross it. I swallowed hard, nervously put my car into gear, and crept forward across the junction. The bridge clanked and seemed to groan as I moved hesitantly over it, then followed the curve of the road around a sweeping bend to the left, then to the right, with nothing but tall, dark trees leaning over the road on either side. Around the bend, on my driver's side, the right in England, is an old monastery, and through the gates of the monastery, I could make out the shape of a dog, about to cross the road in front of my car, so I slowed. This dog was huge. It was black. It actually looked muscular in its outline. As I completed the bend, my headlights hit this dog. All I can describe it as is that my headlights hit nothing. No reflection off its coat, no details, just like a void. A shadow. This dog turned to me, and its eyes glowed yellow. Not reflections like you get off a cat or a fox or whatever, they glowed. This beast then ran across in front of me. It clearly wasn't a dog. It ran in a motion that wasn't a dog. As ridiculous as it sounds, it seemed to run in a jerky motion, like the really bad CGI motions of old Sinbad film Sea Monsters. I followed this beast until it ran to the side of the road out of my headlight beam and seemed to completely vanish from sight. I looked in my side windows, side mirrors, rear mirrors, nothing. As my car rolled around the next bend in the road past this monastery, the car radio suddenly blurted back into life, startling me. That feeling of dread lifted, and this thought randomly came to me: you weren't meant to see that, it wasn't for you. I felt completely normal but absolutely perplexed by what had just happened to me. I've looked up things that might be this thing I saw, nothing sounds like it. There was a thing called the Manchester Shug, which was a headless dog or something, but it doesn't sound like what I witnessed. If anyone has any clue, I'd love to know. It's bugged me for years now.